Revelation 18. The title of this message is God, Not Gold, because it's all going to burn. And this is what's in the text, so I'm just highlighting it here. Last week, in chapter 17, we talked about two things that you don't talk about in mixed company, and that is politics and religion. So we talked about it here. And then this week, I told you we're going to talk about money. Now, there's got to be somebody here that's going, great, another church talking about money. It's not like that. Or maybe you're like, finally, a subject that I know something about. We're going to talk about money. It's not really like that. Actually, we're going to talk about the problem of worshiping possessions and money and materialism and all those kind of things. And actually, it's one of the things that the world empire in the last days will fall because of. It's not the only thing, but it's a big part of it. That God is going to actually bring his judgment upon the world in the last days. Here, as we're seeing in Revelation, it's a future event in those 7-year tribulation, and we're being shown that this is what he's going to do. And the worship of things is a big part of it. To kind of help us get a framework of what we're talking about here, I want to take you to something that the Apostle Paul said to young Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. The problem in the last days, described in chapter 18, is that. This love of money and greed and those kind of things. Commercialism. The commercial system is being judged here in this chapter. The idolatry of wealth and so forth. We're looking here in these chapters of the fall of something called Babylon the Great. This worldwide economic crash that's going to happen. And then for us today, we're going to be warned about the danger of putting your trust in materialism, the economy, and that we need to put our trust in the Lord instead. As we go through this, I'd like you to consider something, and that is this, because I'm going to come back and ask you about it later on. Are we joined to the things of the world, in this case, materialism, or am I separate from that and joined to God? Is it God or gold? With that, I'm going to take you through this chapter, and I'm going to show you 5 reasons here why God is judging the Babylonian commercial system. There's going to be 5 of them. So let's just start reading here what the Apostle John said in verses 1 through 3. He said, "After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury." As I said, God is judging Babylon. In chapter 17, we learned that it's called Mystery Babylon. And I think that a big part of why that's there is to remind us that it's a place, but it's also an ideology. The angel just told John that it was a type of fornication. Fornication is, to the Lord, in this context, whenever someone worships false gods or has a false idol propensity, that's considered adultery to the Lord. Fornication, in this case. Again, in chapter 17, it was about embracing political power. That was a type of adultery. And false religious system, we learned about in chapter 17, that fornication. Now here in 18, the Lord is going after the love of wealth. It's another kind of false worship. What's interesting about here, I mean, there's lots of interesting stuff, but one thing just to highlight is where he says Babylon the Great is fallen. Isaiah said the same thing around 700 years before this was written He said Babylon the Great has fallen. So which is it? Right? Because we believe that Revelation is future-oriented. Well, it's actually both. Because, remember, Babylon is an actual place that still exists. We actually have a picture, kind of what's left of it, the ruins. I mean, there's much worse parts of it than that, but it's just a photo of a place that's in Iraq near Baghdad that exists today. It's a place, but that was 300 BC, was taken over and emptied out and has inhabited since. But there's also this Babylonian Empire idea that's going to be restored somehow in the last days. It may be in that place. It could be in Rome or somewhere else. But it's going to be the center of false religion and political and economic control of the world. Imagine all the world's financial center in one place. Think about all the places that have financial systems like New York City and Tokyo and Beijing and Paris and London and so forth. All that international commerce is going to be controlled in one place in the last days. But this right here is letting us know that it's not going to last very long. God lets it go for a while, but then it's going to be destroyed. I said I was going to take you through 5 reasons why God is going to judge the commercial system in these last days. And here's the first one in verse 3. It's sorcery. Sorcery or demonic control, however you want to say that. I said sorcery because later on the angel uses the word sorcery. So it makes sense here in my points. But that's what's behind all of this according to the Bible. Because remember, this is going to be the Antichrist capital city and the commercial empire in those days. And so we're being shown that in the last days, the people on earth are going to commit fornication against the holy God with their God, materialism. They forsake God to gain power and wealth. They worship material possessions instead of God. So it's a false idol. And according to this angel, there's demonic control behind it all. He even said that they're intoxicated with it. Did you see that in what we read? They're deceived, so they're just drinking it in. So God is turning his attention on the way the world enslaves people financially. He doesn't like it at all. It's not just for then. This stuff goes on all the time today, too. I mean, all you have to do is open up a social media app or turn on your TV or drive down the road, and you'll be inundated with ads declaring what you need to buy in order to be happy. Don't you? It's everywhere. And in this sense, it's like anti-God to do that. Because in that case, it's like taking the attention away from God and putting the attention on people instead. We're in control here and those kind of things. And I want to serve myself and all that kind of anti-God mentality. And you know, a big way that it's done, because we're susceptible to it, is to go after the things that make us more comfortable. These ads that say, you know, you deserve it. Right? It's intoxicating to our fallen nature. I do deserve it. The second reason that the judgment is coming there in verse 3 for commercialism is luxury. In this chapter, several times, point them out to you as we go, the Lord has a real problem with the love of luxury. You know, just, I deserve luxury kind of a thing. Before I go any further, I know that, I need to say something here. There's nothing wrong with having money or even having nice things. There isn't. There's nothing wrong with buying or selling goods. There's nothing wrong if you have a business to promote your business, because we all need to eat. We all need a place to live, and we all need to know where to buy stuff. We need to know where the store is, or have the sign and the website or whatever. There's no problem with those things. The problem is when you have to have them. Right? That strong desire starts to take over, and it's kind of like a worship of stuff. And the advertisers know that about us. They've done all the studies, and then they train us to not be happy with a 10-year-old car. You have that old car, you loser? Get this one over here. And then they get you to desire it. I must have that. And then they charge you 25% interest on the credit card and that kind of stuff. That's why somebody once said, don't be had by the ad. That's some wisdom right there. Don't be had by the ads. Stuff rules the day here sometimes. Then Even more so, the world commercial system is going to be gigantic. The Lord's letting us know that it's going to fall in the last days. Well, let's continue. Verse 4 and 5 says, "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities.'" So there's this part here that turns the attention to the believers who will be around in that day, because I don't believe this is the church that he's speaking to. I believe that the church is removed before the 7-year tribulation, that we are raptured. We've been over that previously in Revelation. But lots of people will get saved in the last days. We've learned that going through this book. And so the Lord now turns his attention to those people who believe that they won't get sucked into this. As I said earlier, Babylon is more than a place. It's a spiritual ideology. As a matter of fact, it's mentioned around 300 times in the Bible. So why does it do that? Well, because all through Scripture, people are urged to come out of that. Because the Babylon mindset is something that's opposed to God. It's important for unbelievers to know this, but God's people are susceptible to these temptations, especially in a place like the United States of America, where it's a fairly wealthy place, you know. And so we're urged to resist it, to be separate from it, because the trap is everywhere. F.B. Meyer, a Bible teacher from long ago, he said, "There is not a city, town, or village where it does not seek to allure people from Christ." Wow. I think that's kind of true. This isn't a popular thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. Covetousness is a sin. Let me say it again. Covetousness is a sin. Talking about greed, envy, materialism, like that I have to have it kind of thing going on back here. The Bible repeats many times, "You shall not covet." And do you further know that it's right up there in the lists with lying, stealing, adultery, and even murder? It's in those same lists. And yet, many people don't think there's anything wrong with it. So materialism is everywhere. Sort of like, I heard a story about a guy who said to his girlfriend, he's like, "Honey, I can't promise you a yacht or a big house or a Rolex watch like Johnny Green can, but I can promise you all my love." And she said, "Aw, I love you too, but tell me more about Johnny Green." You see, that's the mentality out there, right? Because we want our stuff. And you know, folks have been duped into believing that you have to have the latest and greatest to be happy. You and I, Christian, we know better than that, don't we? Don't we? I hope we do. Years ago, there was this movie, and I'm not going to tell you the title of it because I don't want you to watch it. There was this movie where the catchphrase was, "Greed is good." You guys remember that one? So don't blurt it out. I'm not going to watch it. But you know what's weird about that is that before that started happening, up until then, people never really said that out loud. It doesn't seem like they did, at least. Because we all instinctively know inside that being greedy is a bad thing. We have a conscience that God put in us, and so we know that that kind of mentality is not right. But when you keep saying greed is good enough times, you can begin to start to believe it. And so in the 80s, the greed decade, Americans began to believe that it was good. But it's not, and we know that. It's actually a sin against God. Because we live in the United States, a country that I love, that we can start to believe that everything about capitalism is good. But it's not. Some things are. It can take advantage of people. It can erode human rights. It can promote war. And so we have to be careful about being capitalists and forgetting that we're citizens of heaven here. You see, the enemy knows that people can only be fulfilled by God. He knows that God has put a thirst in us, a hunger for him. But if you try to get it another way, you're never going to be fulfilled. Satan tries to make people think that they can have it another way. And so then the chase is on. There's an entire book of the Old Testament urging us to not have this kind of mindset. Ecclesiastes, it tells us to not try to fill ourselves with the things of the world. As a matter of fact, the writer of Ecclesiastes, Solomon, uses this phrase in there over and over again. He calls it grasping at the wind. You can't grab the wind, and that's the emptiness of pursuing things instead of God. But Satan is really good at this and tricks people, tempts them. And we're misled to believe if we have a better house, we will be happier. Which is kind of weird if you think about it, because at one time we really used to like our house. And then, you know what happens? They build nicer ones down the road. And you're like, man, my house is lame. Have you ever thought that? You didn't think it was lame when you bought it. You start looking for reasons why your house is lame. Gotta get more stuff. You see, the problem is people are looking for fulfillment, for satisfaction, which I can understand, but we think we can get it from the things that we possess. How many people get into huge credit card debt because of it? I don't know about you, but I get a credit card advertisement in the mail every couple of days. And we don't even use our credit cards. They just know you're out there. And you see, you guys, what I'm trying to say is the commercial system doesn't care if you're a slave. We sang today about breaking chains and being free. Don't you want to be free? God cares if you're a slave. And so he tells us the truth about these things. Do you know that the Bible again and again and again teaches to be careful about putting ourselves in this kind of position of things? Here's a warning in Proverbs 22:7. Look what it says in wisdom. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. It's a form of captivity. So God's saying, wise up, you guys. Back to what we're at here in verse 4. God is speaking to the believers in that day. Come out of there. Come out of that Babylonian commercial system. I'm going to destroy it. And he's speaking to the church today about the same things. As a matter of fact, do you know Jesus talked about money and the healthy approach to it quite a bit? I want to show you one example. It's in Luke 12:15. Look what Jesus himself said. He said, take heed and beware of covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of things he possesses. That's such good news there that we don't have to be subject to this. You can rule over this. It doesn't have to rule you. It's so great. That's not what I live for. That's not what you and I live for. It seems like God really despises this stuff, and he doesn't want you and I to try and fill our life with it. Do you know that the drive for things can actually prevent someone from coming to God? I mean, Jesus ran into people like that, like the rich young ruler. It just prevented him, his love of wealth and his possessions and so forth. So what are we supposed to do? You might earmark in your Bible something that I want to show you now from 1 John. If you don't know these verses, this is so helpful because it gives us practical ways that we can have victory over possessions. It's in 1 John 2, verses 15 to 17. Maybe we can all read this out loud together. I'm going to put each of them up on the screens for you and try and let it just sink in. Okay, so let's read it out loud as a church, starting in verse 15. He said, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. It's good news, and there's a lot of practical things for you there, my friend. It's almost as if, well, it's not as if, it is. There's this voice from heaven. And it's there in what we just read, and here in chapter 18 of Revelation. And they're all saying, the voice saying the same thing because it's from the Lord. Come out of that. Do the will of God, my people. Don't let the lust of the eyes ruin you, distract you. You know, one of the things that I've tried to learn over the years, maybe this will minister to you, is I don't want my possessions to own me. My possessions should serve me, not own me. And, you know, I'm like you. I can fall into that trap sometimes where you forget these things. But if that's kind of like what keeps going into us, Don't let it own me. It's a safe place. And so there's a word in there to the believers then and today. Okay, back to Babylon now in verses 6 through 8. It says, render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mix double for her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as queen and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine. And she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord who judges her. Okay, as I said in the introduction, verse 8 shows us it's all going to burn, so don't fall in love with it. Before I share with you the third reason for judgment, I'd like to just, for those of you who aren't really familiar with the scriptures, what this is doing is personifying this system as a woman, right? Not that women are bad inherently or anything like that, or that it's an actual woman. It's like calling your boat she. It would be kind of like that. So it's kind of that similar thing, that this system, her. So the third reason, this commercial judgment, is pride. That's what's going on right now in the verses that we just read. Because look what it says about the Babylonian system. It glorifies itself. It says, I'm queen. I won't see any bad times and all that kind of stuff. That's the mindset. Doesn't think God's going to do anything. Arrogance sort of thing. And of course that goes on today too. But we know that the Bible teaches that pride comes before destruction. And so we have to be careful with that. And the idea that the angel is letting us know here is that those who are behind the system, God, controlling it, they're going to pay dearly. Look what happens next about them, verses 9 and 10. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously, so there's the luxury again, with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. Remember that in the 7-year tribulation, Babylon is the commercial hub for the whole world. There's going to be a one world government and a one world economic system. And so everybody is going to be connected to it. It's not like now where there's a bunch of them. They'll all be connected to one. And the Antichrist will control it, but God is going to destroy it. He lets it go for a while, but eventually he destroys it. And as we can see there in what we just read, they're not going to believe what's happening because it's so big, it's so powerful. That's why they're all brokenhearted. They fell in love with it, fell in love with the stuff associated with it. They love the things in the world more than God. That's why they're so upset. They've put all their hope into it. And so it's a warning for us. And the merchants, verse 11, of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. We've got this expression, there's a difference between needs and wants. And of course, there's things you need, you have to have to live, and then there's wants. And I think this list is mostly wants. They're like luxury items in that day. This would be the stuff that people desire, but only a few can afford. And he mentions them. Things like expensive jewelry and gourmet food and the finest clothing and top-of-the-line Tesla and those kind of things. I'd like you to pay special attention to verse 13. I slowed down when I said it at the end there, that they focus on the selling of people then too. And of course, that goes on today. Exploitation of children and women, things like that. And it seems like not only is it apparent today, but in that day, it's going to reach its zenith. Because It's that mentality of I'm going to get what I want and I don't care who I have to hurt to get it. And God hates that. He's angry. And you can see why he's angry, right? Look at verse 14. The fruit that your soul longed for, you might want to circle that your soul longed for, has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. Wow. Years ago, I took a media class, and they taught us in the class about subliminal advertising. And it was really fascinating because the advertisers put images in things like logos or picture in a magazine or whatever that will put some kind of a thought in your mind. And it's kind of fascinating. I mean, some of them, I guess, could be somewhat harmless, but a lot of it is not harmless. Because what it does is it puts this hunger in a person like, I have to have that. And you don't even know that that's happening. Like we found out about, they showed us pictures of like a whiskey glass that had like an erotic image in it. And you don't even see it at first, but it's there, and your mind sort of picks up on that to like, I have to have that whiskey or whatever. You know what I mean? That's what it's like. And it seems like those kinds of things are a big part, maybe, of why God hates it so much. Because there's people sitting around trying to create in others a lust for things to ruin them. And so that's why it said there, I asked you to circle it in verse 14, their soul longs for them. It's a way that the enemy can get you or whoever to long for stuff, materialism. Now, again, I want to show you another verse because if you haven't had a chance yet, or if you haven't read it in a while, I'd urge you to go back and read 1 Timothy chapter 6 because it gives a great primer teaching truths about our relationship with money, right? Where it's supposed to be at with us. And what do you do if you have a lot of it? Or what do you do if you don't? And, what's its place in my life as a believer and those kind of things. But look at something that Paul said to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:8. He said, now godliness with contentment is great gain. Isn't that great? Just be content with the Lord and not in the pursuit of things. That my soul should long for Jesus, not for stuff, right? So because of what's all going behind this, God's going to destroy the whole system. And that's what's happening in our text. Verse 15 says, the merchants of these things, I'm going to read down to 18, who became rich by her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour, such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who traveled by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what is like this great city? The enemy is able to get people preoccupied with money. It's like a drug. People can escape reality from it. And like drugs, some will sell their soul for it. It's a tragedy. All their hope is in it. And that's what we're witnessing here in this chapter. So when it collapses, nobody can believe it. How can this happen? It was their God, right? When your God collapses, you're like, how can this happen? And again, I'd like you to note in verse 18 that it's all going to burn. I didn't make that up myself. It's in the Bible. It's all going to burn. It doesn't mean we don't take care of our stuff. It just means be careful not to worship it. It's short-lived, right? He said in 1 hour. That's pretty short-lived. I was wondering how this is going to play out in that day. Some people think there's kind of like a nuclear thing that takes out the whole financial system. Maybe the stock market just crashes all. Because remember, it's all confined to one thing. We don't know. But it's over in a hurry. Everything they put their trust in is dissolved in a moment. Wow. I wrote in my notes here, and it's mostly for myself. But I'll just say it to you because there might be somebody here who this could help. I just starred this and said, evaluate my relationship with my belongings. Because we have our things. But I think it's healthy for Christians to evaluate what place those things have in our life, that we don't become in love with them. When I was preparing, I was remembering my sister and I, we were going to Home Depot, I don't know, a couple years ago to get, she had bought a barbecue, and I'd take my truck, because I have a truck, and I was going to help her pick it up. Do you remember this? And so I strapped it down, but I didn't do a good job of strapping it down. And so when we were driving back to her house, she was behind me, and the thing just, boom, tipped over in the wind or whatever, you know. So I pull over, and I'm like, oh, man, I'm sorry. And, you know, we picked it up, and it was kind of like all dented and scratched. And she was like, yeah, it's a barbecue. And I was like so impressed. Oh, she doesn't love this thing. It's just a barbecue. It just really spoke to me, and I remember it to this day, because that's a healthy view. Not that you don't care, or that we just mistreat the things that God has given us. But, and I say this because maybe you're like me, that sometimes your stuff becomes a little too important to you. I drove the same truck for like 12 years or 10 years or something like that. It was a 17-year-old truck until a couple of years ago I got a newer car. And this car is like one of the nicest things I've ever had in my life. And so I'm a little nervous now. I was never nervous with my truck, but I'm a little nervous with the car. And, you know, I treat it very nicely. And we were out driving in Melba the other day, going to my daughter's softball game, and we're driving, and one of the farmlands had the sprinklers shooting out into the road. It was like messed up, shooting the wrong direction. And I was so worried about my car. I was like, I just got my car washed. I don't want to get it wet. And which is hilarious because I never washed my truck once. Like, wait, what's happened to me here? And is this thing my precious now? Like, what's going on? And it shouldn't, you got to be careful with those things, right? Because it's just transportation. Evaluate our relationship with our belongings. Verse 19 says, they threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing and saying, alas, alas, that great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. Everybody's upset, right? Because they put their trust in the world. But who isn't upset? The believers, right? Heaven rejoices. And here's why. Because when you live for eternal things, then all this stuff won't affect you much. If your new car gets smashed, it's a bummer, but you don't completely disintegrate in it, right? It's transportation. Our hope is not in things. They cry. We rejoice. Because my hope is in Jesus Christ. And he never changes. Verse 21 says, then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you anymore. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you anymore. And the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you anymore. The light of the lamp shall not shine in you anymore. And the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you anymore. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. There's a phrase there that's repeated 6 times. You see that? It's not anymore. It won't be seen anymore. It's like the finality of it. The Lord wants you to see that there's not going to be any more beautiful furniture in that day. The best wardrobes, all gone. No more shiny automobiles. No more hit music on Spotify. No more Spotify. No more weddings. No more parties or social affairs. It's all gone. Why? Well, the 4th reason, I said I was going to give you 5. We're almost done. The 4th one is here in verse 23. It's deception. God's going to judge a commercial system because of deception. Remember, the devil is behind all of this, and he's a good deceiver. You see there at the end of verse 23, he deceives all the nations. You see, you guys, and I know this is a little repetitive, but I'm going to say it a different way. The world system opposes Christ. And so the enemy behind it will attempt to trick people to fall in love with something other than God. And believers are susceptible to this. So don't miss the main message here. The people who are going down with the ship, so to speak, are those who put their trust in this world. And again, let me say one more time. This is not condemning you for buying a new couch or having an RV, but it is condemning forsaking eternal life for material possessions. And I know that because Jesus said it. Let me show you an example. Mark 8:36. He said, "For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul?" It's a good question. I pray that none of us will face that. So, these angels warning everybody to not be led away with deception. Well, let's finish. Verse 24. He said, "And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and of all who were slain on the earth." Well, the last reason given to us here for the judgment of commercial Babylon is murder. So number 5 is murder. You see, materialism, in this case, it's gotten so bad that it's connected with people being put to death, killing to get what they want. And again, it's not a stretch to know that this happens today. It's just, it's going to be much bigger in that day. And so, what the Lord is showing us in Revelation 18, that he's going to get revenge in the end. You know, you guys, today, the world is rushing headlong to its destruction. And you know what's amazing about that? Is it's totally avoidable. Nobody needs to face the wrath of God. One key way that it can be avoided, at least with the topic of materialism and worshiping that God, I heard somebody say one time, live for what you could never buy with all the wealth in the world. That's good advice, sage advice for you and I. That means to live for eternal things, to live for the kingdom of God. And then if he wants to bless you with good things, then praise the Lord. God gave me something. But my pursuit of that stuff should not rule me. This is good counsel for the church so that we don't get caught up in it. So, I asked you a question when we started, and I'm going to review it now with you. Would you say that you're joined with the things of the world, or are you separated to God instead? Remember, it's God, not gold, because the rest of all that stuff's going to burn. And we've been warned, so we're not supposed to fall in love with it. Let our things serve us. Amen?